What's up, Barnhill family, and welcome back to your home for all things combat sports.
Yo.
So, guys, UFC 309 just wrapped last night. Today, we're going to talk about the GOAT, Jon Jones, and his defeat that was seemingly easy for him over Stipe Miocic. We're going to get into what comes next for Jon, and does this really cement him as the greatest mixed martial artist of all time? We're also going to talk about the co-main event, Charles Oliveira, Michael Chandler. Uber exciting fight. Had some moments on the feet that were really great, some moments on the ground that were great as well. We're also going to get into the announcement of Shavkat Rakhmonov versus Garry. There will not be an interim belt on the line, but it's going to be a 5-round fight, so we're going to break that one down for you as well. And of course, we wouldn't be able to wrap today if we didn't finish up talking about Jake Paul versus Mike Tyson. What are our thoughts there? Was it what we all expected? But I think we have to start with the real fight from the weekend.
100%.
And that is Jon Jones versus Stipe Miocic.
Yep.
I mean, where do you even really start to unpack this thing? In my opinion, Jon was the best mixed martial artist of all time going into last night.
Yeah.
He solidified it even further. I know Stipe Miocic is 42, almost 43 years old, hasn't fought in 1,200 days, and that's all fine and good. However, he's always a dangerous opponent. He always packs a lot of power in his shots, and he did not have an answer for anything that Jon brought to him last night. Now, Stipe did look a little slower than he has in years past. A little bit stiff, a little bit slower, a little bit more hesitant. But, I wonder how much of that was Stipe getting older as compared to how much of it was just Jon doing everything right in the cage.
Yeah.
I mean, Jon's jab, and Teddy Atlas was talking about it in the post-fight last night, Jon's jab literally couldn't miss.
Yeah.
And Teddy even said, I wish he would throw it even a little bit more than he does. Like, if I'm going to give him any critique at all, which is very hard to do after a performance like that, throw the jab a little more because it doesn't miss.
Right.
Some of those straight power shots down the middle, brutal. The push kicks, the body kicks, the creativity of Jon Jones, and then the ease with which he took Stipe Miocic down in that first round and started to implement some ground and pound. I thought that your wild prediction, which went viral, by the way,
there we go,
that Jon Jones was going to win the fight in the first round using 12-6 elbows. Yeah. It almost looked like it was going to come true. He was throwing elbows. Now, some of them were not 12-6. They may have been 9-3 or let's say 10-4 or whatever. But Jon Jones is, to me, as buttoned up of a martial artist as we've ever seen. He does things to people, like with DC, for example, taking down the Olympian with ease. Doesn't, it's not enough for Jon just to beat you. He has to beat you with what you're good at. And Stipe's really good with wrestling, and he's a great boxer.
Yep.
Well, guess what? Jon ragdolled him in the wrestling, and he outboxed him. I mean, the creativity, I can't say enough good things about this. What are your thoughts on Jon Jones's performance last night?
I loved the fight. And, maybe it might have been a little one-sided, but the main event for this Madison Square Garden card really did need to perform. Last night's fights, there were some good ones, but there were some duds as well. And, man, Jon Jones, I know it wasn't the toughest fight he's ever had in his career, but he brought a performance. He really had the crowd excited in there last night. And before I get into the X's and O's, I just want to say that Stipe Miocic still looked great. Yeah, he was fighting the greatest fighter of all time, but he went longer than the last opponent at heavyweight did, and he took 4 years off. I do think there was a little bit of ring rust there, but I think the rest was good. If it would have been a 2-year rest, it probably would have benefited him, but the extra 2 years added a little bit of rust, and I think that's why he was just stiff, slow, and unable to find his shots and his rhythm. But like you said, you got to give credit where credit's due, and Jon Jones deserves all the credit. Man, the creativity this guy has in the ring is so impressive. His shot selection, everything he does is so meticulously thought out and calculated that when you talk about the creativity of Jon Jones, you can't just chalk it up to what he does in the moment, reacting to his opponent. It's creativity throughout the camp. Every time Jon Jones goes out there, and now he's been out there for, 15 years? He's been a champion?
16 years, yeah.
So there's plenty of 5-round footage to get on Jon Jones, but every time he goes out there, he makes sure he's using a different tool. And I'm not saying he has some sort of secret weapon that he pulls out of every fight. The move in last night's fight was that push kick right to Stipe's body early and often. And when Stipe would get square with him, when he would try to bring a little pressure and walk Jon down, that's when he would throw that kick. And it was wide open. Eventually, Stipe didn't like closing the distance on him, so he tried to fight on the outside. and Jon was still able to find that shot when Stipe was moving out and the range was a little bit different. So that doesn't come just out of accident. That's something that Jon was training. And when you listen to Jon in the fight lead-ups and the kind of the reason he takes his time in between fights, especially later in his career, is because he likes to really game plan for his opponent. He really does like to take the time to have a full camp. And at that level, you deserve to have a full camp to fight the best fighters in the world. So I love that Jon, he's a freak athlete, yes. He's, gifted, he's special, all that stuff is true, but he's a very hard worker, and above all, his fight IQ just sits above everybody else's. He moves like a 185, 170-pound fighter, but he's doing it at 205 for the longest time, and now he's proven he can do it at heavyweight. And I just think the way he moves, the way he strikes, and the way he can take the fight to the ground if he needs to, and in beautiful fashion, by the way. Style points throughout the entire night. The trip to get Stipe down in the first round was beautiful.
Yeah.
Almost gave me my exact prediction. 2 minutes on the feet. He'd look for some sort of trip to take Stipe down, go to mount. I was wrong about that. He went to half mount, but those elbows were vicious. I thought he saw the video, the one that you said's going viral right now, and maybe was trying to make my prediction come exactly true. But Stipe's really tough. And to be completely honest, I wanted to get that prediction perfect, but Stipe wasn't taking a ton of damage when he was down there. He was getting hit, but it didn't seem like he was busted open, and he wasn't bleeding all over the place. He was losing pretty badly, probably a 10-8 round for that first round, but I don't think it was enough to actually stop the fight. I was hoping it would, because my prediction would go even more crazy than it's going right now. But Stipe did the right thing. He did what he had to do to stay safe. And he didn't really get warm and used to fighting a guy like Jon Jones until about the third round. Then you saw Stipe come in with some offense. And he didn't land a ton of shots last night, but what he landed had some power on.
Yes.
And that speaks to Jon Jones's chin, because Jon's been hit by some pretty big guys. He's been hit by some heavy hitters. And Stipe is one of those dudes. Stipe had a lot of success with some lead hooks, even some rear hooks, which are more powerful, and of course his uppercuts. He was finding all that in close range, really close range. When he was in kicking range, he didn't really have a chance. He would lunge forward and lean at Jon, and that's where Jon was able to evade and find some shots after he backed away. But, Stipe was finding his success once he got warmed up in about the third round, but it was too little too late. And I just don't think he had the variety to beat a guy like Jon Jones. He was only able to really do damage on Jon's face, where Jon was able to dismantle his entire body top to bottom. And when you're fighting a guy like Jon Jones, or you're fighting a heavyweight, you have to break him down systematically. Go for the legs, start to chop them down, slow their wheels down, then start to attack the body, get the gas tank hurt. Now go to the head. And this is the type of accumulation Jon Jones showed. Stipe didn't show it. I don't think it's because he doesn't know how. I just think it was a little bit more difficult to get that sort of stuff done on Jon Jones.
Yeah, and it's kind of a cheap way out to just say that Jon is special.
Yeah.
Because we're trying to break down the X's and O's, what happened. But I don't think you can just brush over the fact that Jon Jones is just truly gifted. I mean, the guy, he's tall. He's got the grappling base, which is something that he developed over time.
Great genetics.
And great genetics. But there's just something about him. He's just a unicorn in the sense that he's so difficult to prepare for, because he can beat you so many different ways.
Yeah.
And last night was no exception to that. The only real success that Stipe had was in that close boxing range.
Right.
And Jon was realizing that. It's an immediate switch for Jon. I think that, you look at strikers. Is Jon Jones the best striker in the history of the sport? No. Is he the best wrestler in the history of the sport? No. Is he the best submission artist in the history of the sport?
Nope.
No. Is he the best at ground and pound? Maybe there's an argument for that, but I would still probably say no. One thing that you cannot deny, in my opinion, Jon Jones has the best fight IQ of anybody that we've ever seen compete inside the mixed martial arts rule set.
I agree.
His IQ is off the charts. And if you watch the subtle things that he was doing, he realizes, okay, Stipe's, the only shots he's really landing on me are in that close boxing range.
Right.
Let me go back to the push kick. Let me go back to the body kick, work that long range, work those jabs, and work those straight punches. And he completely neutralized Stipe's best real chance at success, which was landing a big shot on the inside, fighting in boxing range. Jon completely took that off the table, and then it was just a matter of time before he finally landed that shot and got the job done. The finishing sequence was incredible.
Beautiful.
I mean, he's always been good at spinning attacks. And it's not just spinning kicks. I mean, if you go back and watch some of his highlights, he's got some great spinning elbows that he's just dropped people with.
Yep.
He does a lot of damage with his spinning attacks. And then you think about what he did as far as the training camp, which I like what you said, how he kind of reinvents himself in just a little subtle way each time we see him. You know, he brought in Gordon Ryan and Gable Stevenson for this training camp, and you're talking about two gigantic men that are both arguably the best in their respective sports. You know, Gordon Ryan from a submission grappling perspective, and then Stevenson from a wrestling perspective.
Right.
And we all thought, okay, he's got these guys in his camp. Jon, he may be looking for a submission here. He may be looking to, but no, he comes out there and he just picks Stipe apart. But Gordon Ryan, even after the fight, told Jon, he goes, that takedown was beautiful. That was exactly how we had worked it. And I was like, oh, wow, him and Gordon actually kind of game planned for that takedown. It wasn't in the moment. That was something that they'd work. And Jon is one of those guys that, like, and Gordon even said it in the UFC countdown, the production that the UFC put out the week before the fight. He said one thing about Jon is he absorbs things so quickly.
Yeah.
Like, you show him a move one time, and then by the end of the class, he's doing it and he's putting his own variation on it, and he's doing things with that move that I maybe wouldn't have even thought to do. So Jon Jones is, yes, he's gifted. Yes, he's special. Yes, he has the genetics, but he puts in the work. He's very meticulous with his training camps, who he brings in to train with. And he's the GOAT, man. There's nothing more that can be said. So I think from a breaking down the fight perspective, that's kind of, you know, reached its end. It's just Jon is the best of all time, and that's it. Now, I want to talk about what's next for Jon, because Dana White said in the post-fight press conference, after watching this fight tonight, I'm less intrigued to put Alex Pereira in there against Jon. And that's no slight to Poatan. It's just a simple fact of, we all know what Alex's Achilles heel more than likely is, and it's the grappling. When you see Jon Jones taking Daniel Cormier down with ease, taking Stipe Miocic down with ease, these guys are high-level, decorated, in one case, an Olympic-level wrestler. You just have to kind of do the math and assume that he would be able to take Alex down with relative ease. But let's say Alex was a better grappler than he is. Tom Aspinall deserves his shot.
For sure.
Now, Jon has come out, the early betting odds for that fight are -130 for Jon, +100 for Tom Aspinall. So it's almost a pick'em fight. Tom Aspinall is just like Jon in the sense that you said he moves like somebody in a weight class much lighter.
Right.
Tom is very big for heavyweight, but he moves like a guy who is 170, 185. He hits extremely hard. He's got great submissions. He's really good at jiu-jitsu. Is his wrestling as good as Jon's? Probably not. So that would be interesting to see kind of where that goes. But I really believe that Jon Jones versus Tom Aspinall has all the makings to be the biggest heavyweight fight in UFC history. And I think that's the fight that they're going to make next. Jon kind of alluded to it. He didn't say Tom's name specifically in the post-fight speech, but he goes, look, there's some things that you guys want. I need to sit down with Hunter and Dana. We need to work some things out, and then we're going to give you that fight. In true Jon fashion, he's going to disappear for a little while. We probably won't see him compete for 8 or 9 months at minimum. Yeah. But I'm really hoping that they make that Tom Aspinall fight. And I would have said before last night that my prediction probably would have been leaning more towards Aspinall. But after last night, I really just don't know. And I know there's going to be, we have some really great fans. Danger Mouse, shout out to Danger.
Shout out.
He's one of them. He's a big Tom Aspinall guy. He believes that he's the next best thing in the sport. And usually him and I are pretty aligned with our predictions. But I digress. I think I'm going to have to say my early prediction, my early money on this, just looking at how complete Jon is from top to bottom, is that Jon Jones would actually beat Tom Aspinall.
Yeah, I totally agree. And when you're talking about a future fight, you have to look at what we got most recently. Tom has looked nothing but perfect for a while now. But Jon Jones is coming out and looking better than we've seen him. And, you know, maybe this isn't the best Jon Jones we've ever seen, but it's certainly not anywhere close to the worst, where, you know, Jon Jones is still firing on all cylinders.
Yeah.
And when you talk about what's next for him, you do have to look at the performance that we saw last night against Stipe. Everybody wanted to see that. I'm glad that we had that fight, but I'm really happy to hear that Jon Jones isn't retiring. And now, you know, these people that are like, oh, he's ducking Tom Aspinall. Jon's never ducked anybody. He's not afraid of any human in unarmed combat. combat on this planet. With Tom Aspinall is no exception to that rule. But when I'm looking at his fight against Stipe, obviously he's going to have a grappling, as far as wrestling and dictating where the fight goes, advantage over Stipe and Tom Aspinall. Tom is a great grappler. He can do jiu-jitsu very well. He's not going to be able to take Jon Jones down, nor is he going to be able to stop Jon from taking him down. Now, it's not going to be as easy as I think it was for Jon to get Stipe down, but the tenacity of a wrestler, they're going to find their takedowns. Eventually, you're going to wind up with your back on the canvas. And when that happens, we got to find out where the jiu-jitsu is, where the defense is. If Tom's able to defend that, then we're going to go back to the feet. But again, you can't just say Tom is a better striker, because maybe on paper he is a better striker. Maybe he's got better hands. But what we just saw Jon do was basically a flawless performance against the heavyweight GOAT. 4 years removed from the sport, that's one thing. But Stipe is still very much a very difficult opponent for anybody to fight. And I think the striking that Jon showed us, the very high level precision that he was putting, those push kicks, the 1-2, what he was doing to Stipe's body was causing Stipe to drop his hands. Stipe usually likes to have a pretty high guard, to utilize that head movement and get inside, make himself a smaller target while he enters, and then score his boxing on the inside. But Jon was tearing his body up so bad that Stipe's hands were starting to drop to cover up for those body shots, and that's what leads to the things like the start of the end was that 1-2 that Jon landed on him, as clean as you can land a 1-2. He landed the jab. I think his intentions was to only throw a jab. It landed so clean. He's like, heck, the target's still open. My hand's free. Why don't I just throw a 2 as well? And that was all because of the body work that he did earlier. So I say that because it's a perfect example as to what might happen with Tom Aspinall. Let's just say Jon Jones can't get him to the ground and keep him there and submit him. Now we're going to talk about a striking match. And I think that after last night, you still have to give the advantage to Jon Jones because of the creativity. I don't know exactly what the stats are, but I guarantee his landing average was over 50%. He was landing everything. He couldn't miss with the kicks. He couldn't miss with even stuff that he was just doing to keep Stipe at bay, or to keep his eyes occupied. Some of those kicks that had no intentions of actually landing, but he's just putting them up there. That sort of stuff is all so high level, and it sets up all the other big shots that he had. The more style points, again, on the finishing kick. That thing was so ridiculous, right to the spleen, probably broke a rib or two. But when you have those type of performances, and you already know how good Jon is on the ground, and then you see him do that on the feet, it makes you start to wonder where Tom Aspinall is going to go in this fight that would give him the best chance to win.
Yeah, and you said something really important, which was that we saw Jon take some pretty decent shots from Stipe, some uppercuts, some hooks, some stuff like that. And I think that's going to be the fact that he showed real durability is, a really good sign, because if I am looking at, comparing Jon to Tom Aspinall, what's the one advantage? Where's the one place that I think Tom Aspinall has the clear-cut advantage? And I think that he has more power than Jon Jones. I believe that Tom has more one-punch KO, just stunning power than Johnny Bones has.
I'd agree.
So that's the X factor. Can Jon, because you're not going to get out of a fight with Tom Aspinall having not gotten hit.
Yeah.
So Jon's going to take a shot or two from Tom.
Right.
Can he hold up? And I think at heavyweight, the answer to that is yes. Now, I do believe that the punches are going to register to a higher degree against Tom than they did against Stipe. Stipe is still powerful, but Tom, I believe his power with the size and everything, the way he moves and the speed more so than anything, is going to allow more pop to be on his shot. So I do think the shots will register more so against Tom than they did against Stipe. But Jon didn't seem to be fazed by the big shots. And I think Jon's chin is the X factor here, and it's a bit underrated, because when you're comparing the two, you have to, concede the power to Tom, at least in my opinion. But I don't think that's enough. And this fight is a long way from being made, and we'll get a lot more in depth at breaking it down when and if it does actually get made. But I think that we saw some really good signs out of Jon last night with durability to say that he's not only going to be able to compete with Tom, but probably and likely going to remain the favorite in winning that fight. And most people will probably put their money on him going into it.
Yeah, I agree. And of course, I would agree with you as well that of Tom, Stipe, and Jon, Tom is the heaviest striker. He can hit the hardest one-punch KOs, I think, right now especially. But Tom is also a very fast heavyweight. He loves to use his movement, his footwork, his explosiveness to get inside. And one thing Stipe didn't do, and I think this is part of the reason he didn't get knocked out with some of those headshots, is because he wasn't moving so fast. It's like a car crash, right? When you've got two things moving very quickly, meaning a puncher and their opponent, when that power meets each other, that's where the knockouts can happen. You see it all the time. Jose Aldo ran in on Conor McGregor. Conor was moving backwards, but because Jose was moving forward so fast, that punch did the damage. So Tom Aspinall, yes, he's gonna need to rely on his striking if he wants to beat Jon Jones, but don't be so fast. Don't try to use your speed advantage so much to where you add to every shot that Jon Jones throws.
And to keep, an example in as far as Stipe is concerned, think about Stipe versus Fabricio Verdum.
Yeah.
The shot that knocked Verdum out wasn't the heaviest shot that Stipe's ever thrown, but it was the momentum that Verdum was giving him, chasing almost, that caused the fight to end. So that's a really great point, because Tom moves in and out a lot. And so if Jon is able to recognize that, time it, and throw a shot, that shot can do a lot more damage because the opponent, in this case would be Tom, did a lot of the work for Jon as far as making that shot more powerful by lunging in. So it's going to be really, really interesting to see. I hope they make that fight. That's the fight to make. Let Alex fight Ankalaev. Ankalaev deserves a title shot. Tom Aspinall deserves to defend in his interim title and get a chance at undisputed. So let those two fights happen. If by some, I don't even want to say by some stretch, because it's reasonable to think that Jon and Alex would both win their respective fights, then throw them in there. Like even if Alex is at a major disadvantage, let him have that shot. Let Alex Pereira fight the GOAT for the opportunity to become the GOAT. Because if Alex if he beats Ankalaev and then he goes up to heavyweight and beats Jon Jones, now we're a long way from that, but if that were to happen, I think it's pretty clear that Alex Pereira is the greatest fighter of all time. So, but I think each one of them are one fight away from each other, and it also is a requirement that both of them win their next fights. Then you make that fight. But for now, we go Tom Aspinall, and I want to move into the co-main event now.
Let's do it.
Charles Oliveira, Michael Chandler. This one was a lot of fun. Both men left with $50,000 last night, and it was a well-deserved, well-earned $50,000 for both men. This Charles Oliveira looked as good as he's ever looked. This may have been the best Charles that we've seen. He looked very confident on the feet. He was landing real hard shots, both with his punches, the straight punches, the hooks, some knees up the middle. Some of those were razor close to just putting the lights out on Michael Chandler last night. And then his awareness and with the body orientation to get takedowns when he needed it was really spectacular. Because Michael Chandler is a high-level wrestler. He's no easy guy to take down, and Charles made it look kind of easy last night. He really knew exactly how to time the takedowns, what variety of takedowns to use, and then most importantly, how to do real damage once he got the fight to the ground. And in certain rounds, he did more damage than others. I know some of them, he kind of took the back and was working a choke. It wasn't the most exciting thing for some fans that, they were hoping that they'd get to see more of that great stand-up, just because these two guys really put on a show when they're standing and trading. But Charles did everything that he needed to do last night. I want to get your assessment on the Charles performance, but then also kind of look forward, because it's pretty clear now Charles is going to fight the winner of Islam versus Arman. That fight's all but announced for January. So timing-wise, we're talking sometime early to midsummer next year. Did the Charles Oliveira that you saw last night have a better chance against Islam if he's able to defeat Arman, which I think he probably will, and challenge Islam for the belt next? And if Arman is able to pull the upset, do you think the Charles Oliveira of last night can beat Arman?
Well, I think Charles Oliveira looked amazing. And when I first saw him enter the cage, he didn't look quite as defined or muscular or as ripped as usual. And I was wondering if there was something up with that. And then, he looked great on the feet. He had some great moments on the feet, but he was taking the fight to the ground and controlling. And Charles Oliveira is the kind of guy that's going to hunt for submissions, hunt for finishes nonstop. So when I saw him looking for position over submission and not even doing a whole bunch of ground and pound, I started to wonder, maybe he was going through something. Maybe he got sick during camp or couldn't train to the full capacity. But I don't know what the answer is to that. But even if he was sick, it was still a great performance from him. And look, Chandler, his stock goes up every time he fights, and he doesn't get his hand raised all the time.
He's got a losing record in the UFC, but people
rarely
still love him.
Yeah, and Daniel said last night, Michael Chandler has a home with the UFC as long as he wants to fight. So I love to hear that. And look, Chandler, he was making it very entertaining on the feet. When it was on the ground, he couldn't do that much because Charles Oliveira is so good at grappling. But at the very end, he at least was going to try something, started doing some power bombs with Charles Oliveira on his back. That sort of stuff is what people like. And Michael Chandler knew going into that 5th round that he had one chance to go try to knock him out. He had a pretty good opportunity. I thought for a second he was going to get the finish, but he tried. Charles Oliveira is as durable as an old leather boot, so you're not going to get him out of there. And I think these guys, they really did deliver just like they did the first time. It was a totally different fight. It was more a longer battle, more hard fought for both men. I think there was more adversity met by both men, but both of them dealt with it really well. And Charles Oliveira, we say this all the time on this channel, he's just as exciting as Gaethje and Michael Chandler. He just doesn't quite have the same credit. I think it's because of the body build. I'm going to go with because he's long and lanky and these guys are built like cannonballs. That's probably why they look more explosive. They look more exciting. But Charles Oliveira is fireworks every time.
Top 5 most exciting fighters in the UFC right now. No question about it.
100%. And this being 5 rounds was really fun. I had a feeling it was going to end early. I just, the way the first fight went and the way these guys always come out and fight, you just assume somebody's going to go down early on. But they showed a bunch of durability, and even though Chandler will never sniff a UFC title, he's 38 years old, there's still a lot of fun fights for him to have. And it almost feels like the loser gets a better shake in this situation, because Charles was the number 2 guy going into this fight. The only guys that can beat him are the champion, basically, and every now and again somebody else in the division, but really not even in the current division. So when you've got Charles Oliveira, who's basically just waiting for another opportunity at Islam, which, I love Charles Oliveira, but that's not a fight he's ever going to win. It almost feels like Michael Chandler losing that fight gets a better slate of next opponents. He's calling for BMF, and nobody would say anything about that. He wants to fight Dan Hooker. He wants to fight all sorts of people, whereas Charles Oliveira now has to fight either some hungry up-and-comer that wants to take his ranking or sit around and wait to fight Islam Makhachev, and neither of those things are really Charles Oliveira's MO, but he's going to have to do one of them. So it's a situation that sucks for Charles, because I know he's the best fighter in the world, not named Islam Makhachev. But when you've had your opportunity in 155, such a talent-rich division, such a star-rich division, it makes sense sometimes when you get pushed off and put on the sidelines. So I thought as far as the performance goes, both guys deserved every bit of that $50K. I thought that Charles looked like he was the more skilled fighter. It looked like he came in with a good game plan on the feet. He had landed some really good shots. The knees, the kicks, everything he was mixing it up with was really good. And the most impressive aspect of his game last night, in my opinion, was the offensive wrestling. Michael Chandler, as you said, is a college Division I All-American wrestler out of Missouri. He's a legit grappler. I thought if there was going to be takedowns in this fight, it was going to be Michael Chandler's. But Charles Oliveira was able to find some pretty unique ways to either get him up against the cage or get to his back or threaten some sort of trip that's going to force Chandler to give up his back or give up the whizzer. And when he was doing that, he was finding great success. And to be able to take a guy like Michael Chandler down is a real feather in your cap. Even if you don't submit him, even if he does find his way back to his feet eventually, that was really impressive from Charles Oliveira.
Yeah, and I do think that the Charles Oliveira last night can beat Arman Sarukian.
Yeah.
If Arman is able to pull the upset and beat Islam Makhachev, I think that my prediction would be that Charles will beat Arman.
Yeah.
And become the undisputed champion. I don't think that Charles can beat Islam Makhachev.
No.
I think stylistically, Islam, Charles does his best work on the ground, submitting people,
right,
getting good position, working ground and pound. That's just not the fighter that you get when you get in the cage against Islam Makhachev. His grappling is to a level that I don't believe Charles can have success taking him down, holding him down, and doing work there, and then ultimately advance, either doing some ground and pound that damages Islam and wins rounds, or taking the back and working submissions and winning rounds that way.
Right.
Or getting the submission, which is damn near impossible against Islam Makhachev. So I think that Charles is in a tough spot. because I do think Islam's going to beat Arman, and I think Charles is going to get another crack. But we've already read that book before. We know how the story ends. And unfortunately, as big of a Do Bronx fan as I am, and I'm as big of a fan as anybody, I don't think that he's got the recipe to beat Islam Makhachev. But I don't want to take anything away from last night because it was an excellent performance.
Oh, yeah.
I just think Charles is between a rock and a hard place now because he's probably going to go up against the one guy next that has his number. And so I think that's where he's going to ultimately end up, is probably losing another title fight to Islam Makhachev. And Michael Chandler, look, he called for Conor McGregor. He did what he was asked to do. Is like, he waited for the McGregor fight. It didn't happen. So the UFC said, hey, we're going to give you one of the toughest guys in the division, maybe the second toughest guy in the entire division. And, you're going to fight him instead, probably for a lot less money than he would have made to fight Conor.
Right.
Assuming that he would have gotten, a little bit of extra cash for such a big magnitude of an event.
Yeah.
So I say let Chandler still welcome Conor back into the UFC sometime midway through next year. I think that's a lot of fun. He also called for the BMF, Max Holloway versus Michael Chandler.
Right.
You can go ahead and sign me up for that fight as well.
Yeah,
so
seriously.
It is one of those things where it's like the loser actually has more options that are exciting than the winner.
Right.
But that's just for now, because Charles Oliveira is looking as good as ever. And even if he loses to Islam Makhachev, you could easily throw him in there for a BMF.
Right.
You could even throw him in there against Conor if Conor would dare to take that fight, which would probably be a stretch to get Conor to agree to. But I think all in all, excellent performance for Charles. One of the best that we've seen him go out and put on in a little while. And I'm very excited to see him in a title fight, although I don't think the outcome, if the opponent is Islam, is going to be different.
Yeah, the road ahead of Charles Oliveira is very tough, and he's been down that road before. It's a very difficult way for him to get back to the title and to be the champion. But, the thing that sticks out to me about Charles Oliveira is he's been there, he's done that, he's been the world champion, he's got all these records, he's all over the history books of the UFC. He still has that hunger. He still wants to be world champion. So as long as he wants to do it, as long as he's performing like he's performing and being the undeniable number one guy that's not the champion in the division, keep giving him his chances, because a lot of guys, once they've reached the top of the mountain and then they've come back down, they have no desire to go back up again. They might stick around in the sport, but they're not going back to the top of the mountain. Charles Oliveira believes he's the king, believes he's the best in the world. And when you have that kind of belief, you got a finite amount of time. And I think we should not think about Charles Oliveira's next fights not being for the title, even though he's already lost it a couple of times and Islam has his number. I think if he's going to go out there and do this, he's a deserving guy. If Islam doesn't have the right person to go against, put Charles Oliveira in there. And then another thing is, as long as Charles stays hungry like this and keeps winning, there's a lot of rumors that Islam Makhachev's looking at 170. So you could see him vacate that 155 title. Now, Charles Oliveira, if you say there's a vacant title at 155 on the line, who deserves it? I don't think anybody's poll wouldn't have Charles Oliveira on the top 4 picks, and I don't think Charles Oliveira wouldn't be the top percentage pick if you did one of those online polls.
Yeah, if Islam vacated and, Charles Oliveira, even if he loses to Islam sometime in the summer, and you were to say we need 2 people to fill a title fight for a vacant title,
Conor McGregor.
Charles Oliveira has to be one half of that equation. So really good stuff out of Charles. I want to move to some exciting news now.
Yeah.
So we have some clarity for UFC 310.
Yeah. Speaking of 170.
Right, what the co-main event is going to be. And it's going to be Shavkat Rakhmonov versus Ian Garry. Now, one of the most rare things that you see in MMA today, not in the lower levels, because a lot of people have, they're just getting started, they're 7-0, 8-0, whatever. But to see 2 guys that are getting close to that 20-0 mark, that are both undefeated, that are both coming together to fight each other, is a rarity. And I think that's special. Ian Garry is very good on the feet. We know that. We've also seen him grapple in a fight where he, potentially had a disadvantage as far as speed goes on the feet against Michael Venom Page.
Right.
But Shavkat Rakhmonov is about as complete of a martial artist as there is in the sport today.
Yep.
This guy's riding about 50-50 submissions to knockouts. He has a 100% finish rate. Now, this fight is not going to be for the interim belt, and that was rumored that it could be for the interim belt. And you and I actually had a slight disagreement last week on that as to whether this should be for the interim belt. And I still don't think it should be, and I'm going to tell you why. Number one, it was just 3.5 months ago that Belal Muhammad became the champion.
Right.
So normally, if you look at the history of interim belts in the UFC, the champ has been inactive for 8 to 12 months, and we don't really have clarity on when they're coming back.
Right.
With Belal Muhammad, he just became champion less than 4 months ago, and we have a defined amount of time that he's going to be out. He's got 6 weeks to rest the toe injury, and then he's going to be back in training camp. We could see him before Ramadan. So when you have the answer to that question, when is the champion coming back?
Right.
We have a reasonable time frame for when that's going to be. And then the other part of that equation is how long has it been since the champ's been inactive? And when the answer is less than 4 months, I think those two things together make it pretty clear that it shouldn't be for an interim belt. But to me, this is for the clearest cut number one contender in the sport. Whoever comes out of this fight as the victor, especially if they are to get a finish, which if, Shavkat is able to win, we know he only has one way to win, and that's to win by finish, then he's as clear of a number one contender that the sport has going today.
For sure.
Maybe besides Tom Aspinall. But,
yeah, true.
But, so I think that it's really exciting. I want to get your early thoughts. As it gets closer, we'll break the fight down X's and O's, but just your thoughts on the matchup as a whole and what each guy really kind of needs to do in order to have some success.
Yeah, I love the matchup. I don't love that it's not for an interim title. I still think that there should be a belt on the line, and the reason for that is it makes more sense for the next fight. If you can sell a title fight right now, it makes sense, and then having an interim title on the next fight later down against Belal doesn't change Belal's stance with the company. It doesn't change anything.
Still getting pay-per-view points and all that. Yeah.
Right, yeah. So I feel like they might as well do it because 310 needs another title fight. When you got the 125ers and they're not really moving the needle the way they need to, and we got a guy who's making his pro debut or his UFC debut in the main event, I feel like we need another title fight on that card. And if it's interim, people are just going to forget about that. But to see another belt up there is a really cool thing. And as far as number one contendership goes, this is the best fight. This is a way better fight for me than Usman versus Shavkat. Usman has done a whole lot of work, and he deserves a lot of credit in this sport. But his recent fights have not been that of somebody who deserves a title shot.
3 losses in a row, yeah.
Right, and they're all hard fights. And look, he's been there, done that. But, Ian Garry, if you told me pick 2 guys out of the 170 division that deserve a title shot, of course I'm picking Shavkat. I'd probably think for a second before I stumbled upon undefeated Ian Garry, but those are the 2 guys that deserve to fight for number one contendership. Now, I'm kind of contradicting myself because this is a number one contenders fight, and I'm saying it should be for a title. I do believe Shavkat's done enough to earn an interim title. I think Ian Garry probably needs one more fight before he's in discussions for a title, and maybe that's why they're not doing it. But either way, whoever wins this fight is really going to cement themselves as the number one 170-pound fighter in people's minds. Because when you're out for a little while or you haven't, really caught on with the fans, people just forget about you. They dismiss you. You win your belt, but you haven't defended it yet. And in Belal Muhammad, I'm talking about. And people are just going to see somebody like Shavkat go out there and maybe have a dominant performance over Ian Garry and just assume that the champion Belal is toast whenever they meet up. So I think this fight is going to be a big eye-opener for us to see where where Belal hangs with the guys in his division. Because if Shavkat goes out there and makes easy work of Ian Garry, I assume he will be the favorite against Belal Muhammad.
Yes, I would say so.
And so this is a very interesting fight. And when you have these big fights and a card needs a little bit of help, I'm always for putting a title on it. But I'm not somebody who's like angry that there's not a title on this fight. I just think that there should be an interim title because, with Ramadan coming around and Belal not fighting, I assume he's not going to fight till after Ramadan. And the division just feels like it needs to be moving. Heavyweight moves slow, but these lighter weight classes, they should move a little bit quicker. 70 and 55 have tons of stars. They've got tons of guys that are ready to fight right now, and they're going to move the division along quickly. So I think we need to get that fight going. I'd prefer it to be an interim title. And when you talk about the X's and O's of this fight, it's a little bit unique because when we see Ian Garry out there, I guess Michael Venom Page is an exception, but most of the time Ian Garry is the taller fighter. He's got more range, he's got more distance, and he can use that range really well. He uses every inch of that octagon really well. takedown defense is really good. So I'm really interested to see how he does with Shavkat, because I was hanging out with both of them last year in Vegas, and at different times, but I couldn't see them right next to each other, but they're both, I guarantee they're really close to the same height, same size. They're kind of built the same long rangy fighters. So I'm interested to see how Ian Garry's going to avoid getting taken down and how he's going to be able to keep the fight on the feet, because everybody knows if Shavkat gets a hold of him, is able to bring the fight to the ground, he's going to find his submission. And Ian Garry's best chances are to get this fight won on the feet, but I don't know if that's going to happen. I think Ian Garry will fight for a UFC title at some point in his career. I just don't think he has what it takes to beat Shavkat right now, or Shavkat when he becomes champion.
Yeah, it's a very tough proposition for Ian Garry, because I think there's a massive grappling disadvantage for Ian Garry.
Yeah, and his takedown defense is great, but some of these guys, they just know how to get inside, and eventually they're going to find their shot.
Yeah, and Shavkat has taken down many of people whose takedown defense was great.
Right.
It's one of those things that he's eventually going to get his takedowns.
Right.
And so that, to me, really, this fight is going to answer a lot of questions leading into the Belal fight with whoever wins. Because Ian Garry, I believe, does have a striking advantage, a small striking advantage over Belal Muhammad.
Yeah, and Shavkat.
But Belal is a much better grappler and pressure wrestler than Ian Garry is. So if Ian Garry is able to prevent Shavkat from taking him down, at least for the most part. We know he's going to get taken down at some point. But if he's able to mitigate and reduce the amount of takedowns that happen in the fight and win the fight on the feet, that's a really good sign in his favor for the Belal fight, which will be his next fight, because I believe that he can outstrike Belal. And if he can prevent Shavkat from taking him down, the common, consensus would be that he could probably prevent Belal from taking him down.
Right.
Now, it's the exact opposite for Shavkat for me, because I don't believe that the takedowns for Belal are going to be a factor at all in the Shavkat fight. I think Shavkat can pretty much dictate where that fight takes place. If he wants to take Belal down, I believe he can. If he wants to keep it standing because he's seeing an advantage there, I believe he can. So he's fighting an opponent who's a much better striker than his next opponent potentially. And so if he can get away from the damage and the accumulation and the variety of strikes that Ian is going to bring his way, then I think that bodes really well in his favor against Belal.
Yeah.
Because if he can outstrike Ian Garry, then I believe he can outstrike Belal. So it's a really telling fight for both men, and for different reasons. Honestly, kind of opposite reasons. And so I think it's really exciting. I'm very keen to see what happens in this fight, and I think the winner versus Belal is going to make for a really great 170 title fight.
Yeah, I think so. And Shavkat, if he goes out there and does what he does, then you're talking about an undeniable future star. I mean, he doesn't even speak the language English, but if he goes out there and beats Ian Garry like that, you're gonna see something very serious. And
same for Ian, by the way, too. Like
true,
Ian's like, I know what the whole situation with his wife and like everything that's happened, and Ian hasn't always handled that the best of ways, but
disaster.
He's still a star. Like, we have to, like, even if you don't like Ian Machado Garry, you have to call a spade a spade. The kid speaks well. He's a fun fighter. He's young. I believe that he is a star in the making.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I think if Ian Garry, like you just said, you made a good point. So if Ian Garry goes out there and beats Shavkat, he will likely be the favorite against Belal, because Shavkat and Belal, they're not the same fighter, but they're more similar. If Shavkat goes out there and beats Ian Garry, he's going to have to wipe the slate clean for his next camp against Belal, because it's a totally different fight. He's going to have to game plan completely different. Ian Garry can kind of game plan for Shavkat, and if he gets his hand raised, the same sort of game plan that worked for Shavkat could work for Belal. So, yeah, I think this is an interesting fight. I'm excited. This fight card needed it. I would prefer it to be an interim, but of course, as long as we got good fights, and it's going to be a 5-round fight, so this is going to be amazing. And I really think the 170 division is going to have some more excitement. It's funny because for the past like 3 or 4 years, it's just been so exciting, and we've seen these guys sort of emerging from the Sean Brady days where they were just kind of coming up undefeated, and now we've got this whole slew of new undefeated guys that are all just so good. I love that we're not following the boxing model, and we got these undefeated beasts just coming in young and fighting each other, seeing who's going to get the title. So yeah, this is awesome.
Yeah, and dare we recap Mike Tyson versus Jake Paul?
The biggest fight of the weekend?
I don't know about that.
I don't know. I think, well, the first thing I want to say is welcome to the world of live sports streaming Netflix, because ESPN has been getting it for the past 7 years from us and from all UFC fans across the board.
I have not held my tongue on ESPN Plus.
No, but it was. I bet you ESPN felt really good to see Netflix just sweating, because the stream was really hard to watch. Later in the fight, about after the second round, I was able to finally see the fight throughout, and so I missed the first round, which I heard was Mike Tyson's best round, and I was able to finally get it and see the stream without it buffering too bad from the second round on. But yeah, I missed the first round, but this fight was something.
Side note to that too, I believe that as the UFC negotiates their distribution deal, the company that comes to the UFC and says, hey, we're going to spend the millions that are necessary to fix this glitching in the stream, is going to be who the front runner is for who the UFC does their next broadcast deal with.
I agree.
Because ESPN Plus for the last 7 years, and I don't know if it's just me, but I know at your house it's the same, and other people that I've spoken to, it's just so unreliable. It freezes up and then it restarts in a different position than it was before, and you miss a couple of minutes of the fight and you got to go back and watch it. And
or God forbid it pauses and then it comes back and somebody's laying on the floor.
Right. It's just not a... And listen, I'm all for technology. Being able to sit here and do this and record and in a couple hours put it up on YouTube and get it broadcasted all over the world. I mean,
it's amazing.
I love technology, but sometimes technology is not where it needs to be for a certain thing to be really viable at this point in time.
Right.
And streaming right now is that for me. It's just not... something needs to be fixed so that these things don't happen. And I was really hoping, because Netflix is a front runner for... who the UFC does their next deal with, that Netflix would come out and it would just be smooth as butter, clear picture, but
not so fast.
That wasn't the case.
Apparently, also, it wasn't just affecting people trying to watch the Tyson fight. It was affecting people that had no interest at all in a boxing match.
They're just trying to watch Peaky Blinders.
Yeah, they want to watch The Office and they can't watch it, so they're getting angry too. And one thing I will say before we get into the X's and O's of the Jake Paul fight is, I believe that Netflix was definitely one of the front runners, and when you see this bodes well in ESPN's favor, because if Netflix can't fix this problem, why do you think the grass is greener on another side? Netflix is the biggest company we compete with. ESPN and Netflix sit right here. Everybody else, what are you going to go to Fubi TV and get no buffering? No, that's not going to happen. So both the big dogs are buffering. So we're gonna see where it's going to end up. I'm excited, but I do think this Jake Paul experiment with Mike Tyson for Netflix kind of bit them if they were looking to buy the UFC.
Yeah, and dare I say YouTube might be in the running as well, because if you talk about
they don't have buffering.
Yeah, who does streaming better? You watch a live stream when
Karate
Joe Rogan's
Combat
not doing when he's not commentating. Usually he's doing a live, and I get it. The numbers are not this. Joe does big numbers, but
not UFC numbers. Yeah,
not the same as a big UFC pay-per-view event. So it's going to be really interesting to see. But
what do you think about the fight?
Now to the fight. So a couple of things. I believe Jake Paul showed a little bit of mercy on Mike Tyson.
Me too.
I think that the fight itself wasn't great. Mike Tyson is Mike Tyson. He's one of the most feared heavyweights of all time, and for good reason, but he looked like a 60-year-old man, and they're competing against a guy 31 years his junior.
Right.
So it's one of those things where, what is there to break down from a technical standpoint? Okay, let's look at Jake. Jake has been boxing for about 5 years now, seriously. He's getting better. Yeah. He's improving his boxing skill, and 5 years ago, nobody in their right mind would have, even at 58 years old, you take Mike Tyson of today and you pluck him into a fight 5 years ago with Jake Paul, nobody in their right mind would have thought that Jake Paul stood a snowball's chance in hell at that fight.
Right.
So Jake is clearly improving. Mike looked labored. Yeah. He looked slow. He obviously had the knee brace on. He was biting his glove, which I know he's done that in the past, but never like
that much.
The entirety of the 8 rounds. It seemed like Mike didn't really have an answer for Jake. And when you think about Jake, what is his best weapon? It's power. Say what you will about Jake Paul, but you don't want to stand in front of him and take a shot. Look at Tyron Woodley. He put Anderson Silva down And I get it, Anderson was 46, 47 at the time, but Anderson's arguably the best striker in UFC history.
Right.
If he's not your number one, he's damn sure in your top three. At least he better be.
Yeah.
So, Jake Paul is definitely making improvements.
For sure.
Where he goes from here, I don't really know. Mike Tyson said he's still not done yet. I think that's a mistake. I think he made a lot of money. He needs to be done at almost 60 years old. But Jake's biggest weapon is his power.
Yeah.
He does hit very hard, and we didn't see a lot of those massive overhands and massive power hooks and stuff like that against Mike. And I personally think that was because he was trying to show a little bit of mercy on a great former champion. We know that they're friends. We know that the Paul brothers' dad's favorite fighter and close friend is Mike Tyson.
Right.
So I personally think that the fight, to me, even though it was scored and it goes on their records, it felt more like an exhibition to me. I want to get your thoughts on that and whether or not you thought Jake really did show mercy to Mike.
Yeah, it looked like a friendly sparring match to me. And, Jake, in my opinion, showed a lot of maturity. And I don't want people to think that, he could have knocked Mike Tyson out at any moment during that fight. But I certainly saw some moments where Jake could have thrown some shots that would have done some serious damage. And he kind of refrained. And when he did throw his offensive attacks, instead of planting his feet and really, putting some torque behind his shots like he did against Tyron Woodley and he's done against all of his other opponents and found a lot of success. Instead of doing that, he was kind of combo boxing, jumping in, throwing a 1-2-3, landing every bit of it and not throwing it too hard and
moving a lot.
Moving and just touching Tyson. And look, Tyson, I believe the first couple rounds, Jake went in there fully intending to fight and see who was going to get knocked out. And I think Mike Tyson, proved to us that at 60 years old, you're good for about 6 minutes against a guy 30 years younger. If you're if you're the best boxer in the world at your time of your day, when you turn 60 years old, you can go about 6 minutes with a YouTuber that's been fighting for 5 years.
Yeah.
So we figured that out. He looked good for the first couple rounds, apparently. So anything after that, it felt like he was kind of being carried a little bit, and they were putting on a show. Jake Paul, I think, realized after the second round that the volume and the amount of strikes and offense coming out of Mike Tyson was minimal. He was doing a lot of defense, a lot of standing, a lot of biting of the gloves, and he says that's just something he likes to do, is for nerves and whatnot. But I am with you. I saw the same thing you saw. I think that Jake Paul showed maturity. And going into this fight, I was saying that Jake Paul seems like the kind of guy where if he has the opportunity to knock out the baddest boxer of all time in Mike Tyson, that he will take that opportunity. And after last night, I can tell you that I believe he saw those opportunities, at least a couple of them, and refrained from throwing those big shots because he's a good friend of his. Because I don't think that, we talk about the 60-year-old thing, and I just want to say this, that Mike Tyson, yes, he's 60 years old, but you also have to think about Jake Paul, and people are going to quickly just bash him because he fought a 60-year-old man, but to show the grace that he showed, he's never punched a 60-year-old man in the face.
Right.
So that must be a weird feeling. That must feel a little odd for a guy that to be fighting somebody that could be his grandfather,
Right.
and it almost probably felt weird for him. I'm sure the experience for Jake Paul was even more weird than the experience for Mike Tyson. And I think the outcome is as good of an outcome as we could have hoped for. The old heads that don't know anything about YouTube or boxing, and all they do know is they hate the Paul brothers, and they grew up watching Mike Tyson, and their parents love Mike Tyson, and Mike Tyson's going to crush this YouTuber. Those people, they understand that Father Time is undefeated, and nobody's going to escape that. And then the Jake Paul fans that said there was no chance that Mike Tyson, would go in there, realize that Jake Paul is an individual who has a heart, and he wants to, give the people a good show, but he also cares about the livelihood and the quality of life of his friends and his family friends. So yeah, I'm not mad at the event. I going into it, I was looking at it with a pessimistic view, but after seeing it happen, I'm glad it happened. I think both of them made a boatload of money. Mike Tyson wasn't forced to do that. Mike Tyson wasn't forced to get in there and fight him. He was offered $20 million to fight a kid, and everybody deserves to choose what they want to do in this life. And if Mike Tyson at 60-year-old wants to fight a 25-year-old for $20 million, he should be allowed to do it. He shouldn't take any crap. And the 25-year-old who gives him the $20 million to do it also shouldn't get crap.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect assessment there. And Jake, obviously he's been calling Canelo out for a while.
Yeah. Oh, before we get to the Canelo, can I just say the one viral thing of this entire event was the assless chaps that Mike Tyson had on before the fight. And it's funny to me because this great boxing event with one of the most well-known boxers of all time and one of the most viral, polarizing figures in the world today. And the most exciting thing was after he kissed one of his trainers, he walked off with his assless chaps, and that just took the internet by storm.
Well,
sorry to cut you off.
Conor McGregor has a beautiful way of summing things up on Twitter after a couple of proper 12s, and he said, I believe, and I'm going to be paraphrasing this, he's got an ass like a mule on him. He's got nipples as thick as cigars, and he's got one of the heaviest punches in all of combat sports history. God bless the legend Mike Tyson.
There you go.
I couldn't say it better than Conor myself, so I'll rip off his tweet and just say that.
You're like Ian Garry.
Exactly, exactly. So, the reality is 60 years old, no matter how good you once were, no matter how powerful you may even still be, there's a limit to what you can do.
Right.
And, so to me, it did feel more like an exhibition. The Canelo fight, who knows if Canelo's going to actually bite on that and fight Jake Paul. Canelo's still at the upper edge of his competing prime. We've got a couple years of prime Canelo, left at best, if we're lucky. Does Canelo, who is much smaller, he's been fighting, 154, 160, 168. We've seen him try to come up and go into that 175 light heavyweight territory and, fall short. Now, that was against Dimitri Bivol, so, we have to preface that. But I think that Canelo versus Jake Paul, if it were to happen a couple of years from now, is something that there would at least be a reasonable doubt that Canelo might lose because of the size disadvantage. I want to say Canelo's, 34, 35 years old. So you push it to 36, 37, then you let Jake have another couple of years. Now he's in his late 20s, early 30s. He's got another couple of years of real pro boxing training.
Heavyweight
and a
size.
couple more fights underneath him. I mean, let's just call a spade a spade. Your jaw and your facial features don't really change unless you're on some extracurriculars. Right. So
your head doesn't tend to grow that much naturally. But
Jake Paul is definitely
enhanced,
enjoying some of the enhancements that money can buy you. Let's just leave it at that,
as he should.
So who knows? I don't think that fight happens next. I think Canelo really does want to try to solidify his legacy and win a few more marquee boxing matches against real champion level opponents. But listen, the Jake Paul payday is a real thing.
Yep.
And Jake Paul versus Canelo Alvarez will be one of the biggest pay-per-view events, if it's a pay-per-view event, or who knows, Netflix just backs up the Brinks truck for these guys and makes it free. Either way, both of those guys are going to walk out with a boatload of money. Could potentially be the biggest payday in the history of Canelo's fighting career. So, if he's like, hey, I got a chance to go beat this YouTuber. Yes, he's bigger. Yes, he's younger. Yes, he hits hard, but this will be an easy night in the office for me and I can make 60, 70, 80 million bucks. I think he'll take it.
Yeah, I believe he could take that fight. I think Canelo and Jake Paul will fight at some point. I think it'll be probably a couple more years. Like you said, Canelo is going to compete with the real boxers for a little while longer. But I think when he gets a little bit older, he's going to look for a big old payday towards the end of his career, get to be the guy that shuts up Jake Paul once and for all. But the only other thing I'll say, and we'll leave after this, Jake Paul also called out Conor McGregor, this time not in boxing. He said, I'll fight you in MMA. No weight classes, just how you like it. So the only thing I'd like to see more than Canelo fight Jake Paul in a couple of years is maybe 1 or 2 years from now, see Conor McGregor do an MMA fight against Jake Paul. We always say the boxers never want to come fight the MMA guys. If they finally did, they'd understand why they stick to their boxing. I don't know how a MMA fight with Conor McGregor right now versus Jake Paul right now, no weight classes, goes. I'm a major Conor fan. I'm a UFC guy. I want the MMA guy to win, especially if it's in MMA. But at 230 pounds, he hits really hard. Conor's not that active. If there's any way that fight can happen, I believe it's a more competitive fight than most people would probably assume right off the bat.
Yeah, the PFL and UFC arrangement would be the biggest hurdle in that fight.
Yeah, it won't happen.
Because we know Jake is signed to the PFL. the UFC, Conor's the biggest cash cow in the history of the UFC.
Yeah.
The UFC is not going to let Conor out of a contract to go to. They're not going to let their biggest star out of a contract to go to a competing organization to put on a huge night of business.
To fight a guy that Dana is a thorn in Dana's side at all times.
Exactly right. So, who knows what'll happen. I think that's a perfect place to leave it.
Yeah.
Jake Paul, congratulations. Mike Tyson, glad he made a bunch of money.
Yeah.
I think it's time to hang up the gloves for Iron Mike. We don't want to see a BJ Penn situation happen with one of our favorite boxers of all time. And I think that it's time for him to call it a day.
Yeah, we can't leave this weekend with Stipe Miocic retiring and Mike Tyson not retiring. So let's just both of these guys, let's give them a nice vacation and go enjoy their retirement.
Absolutely. Guys, thanks so much for watching this episode. We drop new episodes every week. We talk all things combat sports. If you're into that, we would really appreciate a subscribe on the channel. Hit that like and drop us a comment and let us know what your favorite fight of the weekend was. Have a great week, and we'll see you next time.
Check out the Discord. Peace.